Welcome to Salon. Salon is a production of One Week Critique, an Iowa-based arts and education nonprofit that offers educational resources and editorial support to students and teachers of the literary arts. You can learn more about us and our programs or support our work by visiting our website, oneweekcritique.com. That's the number one, weekcritique.com. And we're happy to be with you tonight. We have two fine readers. Jon Riccio and Robert Carr will be our readers tonight. We are going to start with Jon. Jon Riccio teaches literature and creative writing at Beijing Jiaotong University and the University of West Alabama. He is the author of Agoreography and two chapbooks, Prodigal Cocktail Umbrella and I, Romanov. He serves as the poetry editor at Fairy Tale Review. Jon, take it away.
Thank you, Matthew, for making this possible. Thank you, Andrea, for making this possible. Thank you, Bob. We've come a long way. I remember we've been in contact, I think, since 2016, back in the Amaranth days, the Amaranth interview days. And it's just been wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And this book, Agoreography, would not have been possible without Andrea's amazing editorial insights and the questions she asked throughout this process. And Matthew, who we did our MFA and PhDs together, who was always had my back as a reader and as a writer. And Joe, who was also in the PhD program at University of Southern Miss, another one who always has my back as a reader and writer. And without further ado, I will be reading some poems from Agoreography. And this collection is about my experience with mental illness in the form of obsessive compulsive disorder and agoraphobia, and the ways in which it quite often painted me into corners over, about 2 decades worth of corners, and my emergence from that illness and how I made my way back into the world. And I understand that there are 20 minutes, so I'm pretty low tech, but I do have my timer. Thank you again, everybody, for coming here and making this possible. The first poem I will read deals with the fact that with obsessive compulsive disorder, quite often the first symptom is, in my case, a lot of hand washing, compulsively, obviously. So I thought I would write a poem that addresses it. My hand washing explained. If life gives you lemons, render into cleanser. Leeches, boil the vanity. Lynxes, reformat your zoo. If sepsis gives you purpose, work for the CDC. My 20s were bravura, duets for fixation and support group, contagions that frazzled like SETI anaphora. Unproven, they Fahrenheited my derma. What damaged the nerve flim-flam? Pathogens, a steam fugue. If the brain gives you leopards, atrophy with faucet. Looking for a leeway, I burrowed through the citric while my disorder courted sink magma. I'm surprised my hands held the scald imperatives they received. Part of this book's project was to lend some insights for those of you who have never experienced what it is like to live with a family member who has mental illness, in my case, obsessive compulsive disorder and agoraphobia. So this poem called Eating gives you a glimpse of what it was like at the height of my illness to try and go grocery shopping on a daily basis. Eating. A family-sized lasagna defrosts in my left hand, fingers at the ready should they sell macaroni and cheese in bundles of 3. These aisles, freest of contaminants, shelf scuffs accounted for. Never mind the mystery splatter intruding on the super logo display. I buy groceries at the Giant Eagle every other night. Pay with a credit card dipped in peroxide to sterilize whatever microbes make their home in my birth name's embossment. The shortened version I go by for quicker interactions. There's a fancier store in Aurora, 9 on a scale of sanitary, next to the yawn, and you've missed its one roller coaster amusement. Last month, I saw a shooting star reflect off a pod of tilt-a-whirls. Supposing rides follow taxonomies, similar to how I depersonalize down to a monosyllable for phobia's sake. Therefore, my family. When the upstate relative offered me a job selling solar-powered chainsaws, I asked if the teeth ran on class. Another cousin married the brawny paper towel man. Stability, the kind of mustache you throw in a shopping cart. At reunions, aunts with chiropractor sons learned about my obsessive-compulsive disorder over pasta e fagioli. An uncle's basement full of t-shirts lionizing the greasy spoon that employed 5 offspring. Of 12 grandchildren, I'm the one with Bane sewn on his sleeve. Oh, those marathons of mental illness TV, so beautiful. The set-dressed scenes where compassion funnels. At my germophobic worst, I imagined a nightstand's sneeze vector more Armageddon than armoire. So I shot put it into a wall. True, we spent a mantle-less spring, but when family needed an ad hoc virologist to shield them from the great pathogen debacle of 2003, I came through with flying mahogany. And since we name dropped Armageddon, the previous poem, why not see it through to its logical conclusion with Armageddon housekeeping? I mean, that could be a new line of business. We stave archangels with lie, scour the bunker, then evanesce, father, bristle, and ammonia, son. The laundry chute embalmed as museum to end clothes flocks. We let bygones be dendrites, wonder when I'd hold the prayer shawl made of peroxide wipes, take vibes to a paring knife. Birth signs impression the pie crust, bifurcate a cutting board's afterlife. Sparingly, ferrymen coxswain the broom. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and around this time, we had the invasion of infomercials, whether it's Montel Williams telling you at 2 a.m. how to cure your tinnitus with some lipoflavonoids, or if anyone remembers Miss Cleo and her beloved psychic friends network that, if you just call them up, and in my case, it was in a dorm phone, and I didn't quite know, I'm not the most technology savvy person, so I didn't know how to make those charges get onto a credit card. I don't even think I was using credit cards at that point. But this poem imagines what it would have been like had I made contact with not the other side, but maybe the other end of a receiver, and a psychic was there for me. The area code for ESP, decompressing one shower curtain at a time, just as new carpet smell is another way of saying there's an agoraphobe in need of a housewarming. Mayday and epoch, progress before rooftop, epistolary, the relationship we've yet to reverse engineer. I am the science of my weakest link, value added oven mitts. Insomnia, the best time to befriend a phone psychic between grasp and grip. If you're anything like me, you ziplock tomorrow the night before. My star chart has Brillo deposing it. Springtime, and there's bound to be some weddings out there. So if anybody has relatives that are going to tie the knot pretty soon, and since we're probably all many poets in this audience, there is a form called the epithalamion, which is, long story short, a wedding poem that you would write. So at one moment in my life when I was, again, ebbing and flowing between being in a better mental place and not, I attended a friend's wedding in Ohio in 2011. And I think subconsciously I must have been churning over an epithalamion years down the road. So for that friend who was married in 2011, musicians epithalamion at illness's height. May your marriage last longer than zithers. I outage them by fears. Gift wrap, instrument themed. And continuing the musician's thread, I have a bop that was inspired by one of my poetry friends, Chad Foray at University of Southern Mississippi Center for Writers, who during one of the prompts we would give each other, here's what you should do next week and the week after that. Chad said, write a bop. So Chad, this poem is for you, and thank you for saying that I should do just that. Agoraphobe's bop. Beyond locked doors, writing while a snare drum hides in a harp case. The Cleveland Orchestra's Alice Shalafu changed in hers. A viola begins as a Stradivari, ends up a stairwell. Agoraphobia is like that. Seclude the dulcet, Glie and Hinastera, their harp concertos you play outdoors. At the Cleveland Institute of Music, Madeline Neely brought me bananas on my recital day.
The other guy, this is my friend.
Potassium calmed. She did it as a favor because line lanes were cues for agoraphobias like that. Shalafu, sequestered unrisers, turn the door, surmount a lyre. Shame, I seesaw with harp technique. Shoes and string pedal. Swan song, a catwalk. Agoreographies like that.
You're definitely on.
I'm not.
The next poem, I had heard earlier that some people had a Vermont College of Fine Arts connection. And surprisingly, that is one of the places where I went in 2013 when I was feeling, I'm well enough now to make my way out into the world and go to Vermont, go to University of Arizona for my MFA. But it's always, when you get to that point of wellness, you're always testing yourself. So this poem is called The Vermont Test. I mistake the microphone logo on Dad's Xfinity remote for a horse tranquilizer splashing into Holy Grail. I miss his entertainment center before my parents bought a screen as big as their first apartment in Bakersfield. Here, my mother borrowed a Halloween costume for teacher participation in a hallway parade, chalkboard goblins working through a prepositional phrase. Dad's time machine scenario has them relocating to Amsterdam, New York, rather than Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I'd grow up with 9 cousins instead of none. Extended family might have dimmed the OCD. This idea he wills into a chandelier for ceiling fan planet. When I had the phobia that my underwear was suffocating my GI tract, I gilled the waistbands as if a pelvic Jacques Cousteau. This flustered Mom the most. The go-arounds we had over Haynes Gate. Before she was neuropathy hospitalized, I laundered her nightgown, her cedar chest more valuable than a Social Security number. Energy quilt, sun in Mississippi gilt. Mother gilled the anemones and cousin John's housecoat, terry cloths, the fray. I know my cousins in half-day increments. Know an hour of feathered hair, cigarettes that fed the family kazoo. Cousins know me pre-OCD, and one evening, 2 weeks before my Arizona move, the state flag, an amalgam of non-dairy milk carton and superhero costume. I borrowed John's housecoat for my first out-of-state travel in 6 years. The occasion, dorm living at Vermont College of Fine Arts Postgraduate Writers Conference, or door handles, shower, and loo if I enter UK. The possibility of bodily fluids, a poetry journal I should edit, its premiere issue, Do I Manage Mental Illness, sold from balance beams the width of glockenspiel keys. Manage, meaning supervise? I had a fast food manager who tarred roofs with her twin sister on the side, meaning moonlighting, not parasitically grown. No matter how many times my mother swore I'd acquire worms via raw cookie dough, they didn't crack the OCD list. In college, my best friend and I scarfed half a container of frozen Toll House before we baked the rest, tinfoiled the batch, took individual sticky notes, and wrote, "Have a good day, love the cookie elves." 2 Keeblers and a cooling rack, Bulgakovian in modus operandi, if not execution. The test, would you eat something scotch taped to your door? OCD, the Walpurgis knocked of worst case. John is a back doctor. Talk doctors brought me back. His housecoat, a monk on a metal peg. I have abided, attacked, bungled, buttressed, capsuled, clusterfucked, disbursed, dispersed, eddied, échapped, fled, flummoxed, glad-handed, grand-marshaled, hated, heated, invalidated, interred, jackhammered, juggled, keynoted, kicked, lulled, mangled, meted, narrowed, nullified, overland, obviated, partitioned, punctured, quasied, queered, retreated from, rummaged through, sallied, Sally just say Raphael, stepped into, stepped out of, tailgated, tail spun, trash compacted, trounced, uncontrolled, upshot, vacated, vociferously whittled, X-factored, Yuma forsook, zeroed in on, OCD. It arbitrates a sonic boom, I pathway a pin drop. And I will read 2 more poems. What I most enjoyed about this process of putting together the book was how I could vary my lengths. Right now in my writing practice, I'm probably at that size of the poem is maybe a page at most. Some of the poems in Agoreography are 5 pages in length. Some are 3 little lines, such as that epithalamion. And then you have these 3 epitaphs. Trouble, keeping his sugar straight. 1 daddy warbucks, too many. Arson, the way agoraphobia cauterized him. Rescued bookshelves, refurbished people, misguided shellac. Thank you again, Matthew. Thank you, Bob. I'm very excited to hear your work. Thank you, Andrea, for helping me take a Word document and bring it into this beautiful realized opportunity that is my first book, and a way that it just made its way into the world. And you shepherded it, you stewarded it, you had a line of questioning for it, and I am a better poet for having spent time under your tutorials and your mentorship. And as I said, 2013, 10 years ago, I'm one of those people that's always looking for the symbology of it. As Matthew and Joe would know, if you've seen my apartment, you've got the page-a-day calendars, you've got everything as a symbol there. But I figure that was the year that I relocated to Arizona. I might as well have a poem that, towards the end of the book, that has some rays in it. And if you don't know me now, you know my first love, other than writing and music, is ketchup. If you ever get the chance to dine with me and you see me helping myself to the tater tots, it might be a shock that and I have been known to drain an entire bottle of ketchup, as Matthew and Joe can attest. So there is a ketchup reference in this poem, but it's also that I dedicate to Matthew, who has had my back since 2013, all the way to the Arizona days, when I was at that healthy point. I could consider myself Arizona Hale. Been recording a voicemail of more authority. Verizon, I vacillate between mannered and maybe beta. Family encourages, get a physical, speakerphone style. Mom, the seventh Charlie's Angel, when she's not Nelly Nokia. Many a Southern license plate with barber pole and Masonic compass quaffs occult. How would they manage my father's salon? He learned the Farah, then I'm born. Poem problems? Troubleshoot with syllable septet. Lassitude Novosibirsk. I'm Carrot Top and a tongue twister's son. Jeans, I give you like a peen and Kevin T, showing where to tap the 57. Don't say a poet can't teach preventative measures at a bar with alligator door handles. Twice, Blondies Call Me, played on rental car radios. The Sunday and airplane's tow bar broke, nullifying the nose cone. Turnabout, the crocodile's delay. During an OCD life, headlines and hazmat font. I'm more one way or another. Wash carmine towels for a couch guest. Walk on diesel, and that's as Christ-like as it gets. Sock static engages. Tucson feet I have worn. Debbie Harry, you survived ageism. John, you lifed. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, John, for sharing your words with us. It's always a pleasure. Our next reader is Robert Carr, and I would like to just mention we will have a brief period for questions for our two poets tonight following Robert's reading. Robert Carr is the author of Amaranth, published by Indolent Books, and The Unbuttoned Eye, published by Taos Press. His second full-length collection, The Heavy of Human Clouds, is forthcoming from Taos Press. Among other publications, his poetry appears in Lana Turner Journal, the Maine Review, the Massachusetts Review, and Shenandoah. Robert is an active member of Writing the Land, a nature culture initiative that links poets and regional land trusts to promote conservation awareness. Selected by the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, he is the recipient of a 2022 artist residency at Munson Arts. Robert, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Matthew. And thank you everyone for being here. It's wonderful to see how these relationships both develop and continue. They're very powerful. And as I head into my reading, I'm I've been thinking a lot about why we do this. Why do we write these poems? Why do we read these poems? And and um, and my conclusion is that poetry is one of the most condensed forms of individual expression. And we're in an environment right now where individual expression and individual autonomy is under attack on every level. And particularly for the women in the room. The decision in Texas the other day, it's not just about reproductive rights and health rights. It's about a concerted effort toward the suppression of female sexuality. And my work has grown out of my experience as a queer man and the belief that to put those voices into the world makes a difference. So I'll be reading poems, both the first poem from my first collection, The Unbuttoned Eye. It's wonderful to have Andrea here. We just talked recently, and the first printing of the book has been sold out, and we'll be going to a second printing I'm very excited about. This unpacks my experience with the HIV pandemic. The poem I'm going to read, which I haven't read in a while, is the opening poem in the book, which is, there are a series of epistolary poems in dialogue with Robert Mapplethorpe. The first one focuses on his 3 portfolios of photos. And I feel like it's relevant now because his work in many circles was deemed obscene. And so much is being challenged as obscene, including the criminalization of drag right now. So I want to bring that into the world. There are 3 Mapplethorpe portfolios. The first was his X portfolio, which is his images of the BDSM community in New York. The second, probably his more famous portfolio, which is his images of flowers. The third, his Z portfolio, which were his images of Black men. Letter to Mapplethorpe. The paper skin prints of my left flip through your X portfolio. Polaroid fuck collective, porcelain models pulled from mineshaft piss. What draws me back? Sorting blue blood photos, the albums, black construction paper pages, glued corners, colorless baby portraits, pudgy legs forgotten in silver marker. Robert, are you out there with horns glued to your head? Do you clutch a bouquet of dried carnations, the blossomed assholes of men? Do you miss being in a body? After X, a Y. We, a pair of jacks in the pulpit, stand back to back in Johnny's die on opposite sides of a privacy screen in a shared red room. You would pitch fits to find the whip has fallen out your ass. The Y portfolio stands alone. A floating gardenia. A bowl of leaning tulips. Stop asking, Robert, why, when the air is still, finally breathable, and the dead eye of the world is counting blessings, I am writing endings. There's an empty chair in the corner where pale blue vinyl has split. Stop asking if you've succeeded, if Z is still untouchable. You're long dead. The perfection of black skin has amplified to unspeakable. Thin men measure dark lengths against the lining of a mouth. Gratitude out of reach. I finger a smear on the frames of your black and hairless portraits. Robert, fucking with me still. Laughing eyes blank, holding frozen the silver-knobbed skull of your stick. An eel-white arm leans into your cane. We leer, grip loosening into the composition. So I think some of you will have this experience. Sometimes you write a book just so you don't have to write about that thing anymore. And then you discover that you just keep writing about it. And I'd like to share some poems that are recent that do harken back to my experience through the HIV pandemic. But I find that the poems are changing. They're from a different perspective. And some of these were generated in my work with Lisa Gett, who's here tonight. And I'm grateful to see the folks here tonight from that group. Time Machine on Charles and Boylston. If I could, I'd go back to Boston in bloom, wear white jeans, strut brick-broken sidewalks. I'd choose a parallel world, absent death, relish being mirrored in shop windows with cherry boughs. Blossoming. I'd be envied by honey drip baklava, desired by champagne on pedestals at package stores. Even antique bronzes at Marika's, boys with arms akimbo, bows and arrows draped over shoulders, naked, leaning, and casual, would notice my basket and grieve their drilled sex, a fig leaf screwed to their modesty. Tight. Everything would be tight. The clothes, my crew-cut hair without gray, the waistline, a stallion hammered in my brass belt buckle. And this next poem, going back to very early days of awareness of sexuality. 90 on the highway. A high school boy, he sucks laced smoke to lung, chokes on weed glow, reaches for but misses his unafraid part, the wet wheel tread of adolescence. Men who think he's with them, he has no friends, laugh in burning bud. The reverse direction of rain in headlight is unexpected, rising instead of falling. He opens the back door, swings to set stoned feet on a fast-moving asphalt, repeating flashes of broken yellow lines. He would kiss them, these man hands pulling him back in the Bel Air. He loves their flair, their panic, the maroon pleather seat sticking to skin, a heightened sense of vapor, the scent of sweat he could not have dreamed. And I think as I also get older, I'm starting to view sort of erotic power through the lens of death. That might sound kind of weird. It does sound kind of weird, but that's how I'm experiencing it. So this poem is imagining the speaker viewing his beloved after death. Sharing poet flesh. I'm the soul of desire reduced to meat and would be rolled in your mouth, husband, like the hopeful wide eyes of a calf. A frozen bag, my ball of flesh pounded on a cutting board, a root, chopped onion, and bell pepper. Pounded on a board, a root. We've dared to love. Now bury me. Catching sparks, I burn slowly. Planted seed adores the richness of fresh graves. You've dared to love me. Absorb the duct of unshed tears. I'm the floating feast, toes curled on beds of pyre. The service and God be fucked. My dearest man, bob me in your mouth, break my flesh with a fork. Oblivion desires to be your meal. Share my body with a lover, and I'll rise, a steam, a living muscle, a shared gag. I rise, a clock beside your bed, a raptor shadow. My dearest man, stomach this moment, discard what remains. I am here to feed you in this garden. This next poem, and I'm very honored to have included in the Rainbow issue of Fairy Tale Review, and wanted to share it with Jon here. At the Hatter's Table. Edible, sometimes, cool, whip, dream, whip, butter, cream, butter, stick, sweet and sour, fruit spread, cocoa on my junk. I think of myself as cake. A flesh-colored icing, a granddaddy banquet at the Hatter's Table. Ageless set of creases, a multi-layered thing so happy to be split. Serve me on a platter washed in tears, in sweat, in any other viscous liquid. Write my name and yours on an iced pink chest. Encircle us with a heart. Squeeze what you desire from your tube of batter. The next poem is was actually generated in my work with Lisa and a couple of the poets here in the last year and a half or two. It's also included in my next collection, which will be published by Taos Press, The Heavy of Human Clouds. A break in shade. I've named the boulder shaped like a corpse of a horse. Quartz, dappled with lichen and moss. In the shadow garden, I water the bloated belly, drooping coleus, tender bishop's hat, snowy-edged hosta I split with a blade. The hose coupling clacks over stone, taps like the case of a childhood clarinet dragged along the wall of an institution called school. I'm headlocked, sniffing perihydrangea, sweet armpit of the bully, slack leaves leading me to watering, the horsey bulge in a bad boy's jeans in the shade. Percussive, retreating, wood, wind. This is another poem exploring the process of aging. In mud, I see a starry night. Children lower fluorescent worms to indifferent bass, expecting nature to comply with young desire. Like the fish, I've lost interest in shiny things, sparkling worms concealing death, lake breath blowing through hair of children. I'm drawn to saucers, below, above, the wheeling expanse. Languid as the end of summer, bass suspend over sand-spun sunfish nests. Impasto in sand through sludge, a swirl bed of Van Gogh stars. They snake to deeper waters. Urgent invitations, high-pitched squeals. Please, please, can you take a nibble? My grandniece cries because the whoppers do not bite. I tongue old scars inside my mouth. Taste the rust of hooks. And this is a fairly new poem that will appear in Hole in the Head Review in the next issue, published here in Maine. Pulp. Toward Rumford, on the way to ultrasound my pelvis, I drive the banks of Androscoggin, pass the desperate paper mill. Pulp gas rises in October, pine trunks stacked high, give up growth. In a low-lit basement level room, I sense stomach cells splitting. A nurse named Andy lubes my belly. This should be warm, they say. Sliding through, Andy points out morning coffee, a bubble traveling. That dark line, that's an artery. There's something unknown in my bowel. Back home, I stew in outdoor dusk. A wood fire burns me warm. My rocker creaks and soothes. Overnight, my favorite maples dropped buff leaves and stands an X-ray of itself. Branches like nerve endings silhouetted against hemlock. There are pleasant outcomes. The leaves have no regrets. This tree I love is young and so far from the stink of paper. And my final poem tonight, I know John's adoration of Anne Sexton, and so I'll share this poem, which is also included in The Heavy of Human Clouds. I've split the ash, and now I read Anne Sexton. I spent the morning splitting ash, and now could sit all day in the mouth of my wood stove. Its maw slightly open, hoping to burn my tongue. The sofa's soft denim, braided rugs pooling all over the room. The wind chime clanging in curl at the back door. White-capped lake. Is this the end I want? Backdoor bells? This inanimate book of deadened songs that cover the second voice in my head, the phone on mute. I stand at an unscreened window. Gray-stained water moves beneath the gray-stained wind. Pine needles cling. Wet lashes between my breath and the saddest gale. The house is heating up. I must put on my shoes, get out, kick the fallen mice, the acorns in the drive. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Robert. Wonderful. So again, thank you to John and Robert for reading tonight. We will open up the floor for any questions you have for either poet, both poets, one at a time. Your call. I know it's tough, sometimes to ask the first question, so I'll ask the first question. I noticed both of you write quite a bit about health in one manner or another, whether it be mental or physical. How do you think that informs the sound in your poetry?
Bob, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, the word in terms of sound is, in your question, is body and the exploration of the body. And I think that I do find when I'm when I'm looking at the questions of health and the questions of body and the questions of our mortality, there are all those O sounds that happen. And I would have to go and look at whether what I'm saying is true or not. But that's what really resonates for me, is that I think that there is there's a sound in the exploration of the body when you're writing a poem. And I hear that in Jon's work as well.
For me, with obsessive compulsive disorder, you latch on to, you more like you claw onto things. So part of my praxis, I began my way into the arts world was as a violist. And from age 10 to about 23, it was pretty much my daily existence, practicing and concerts and auditions. And the way I'm so grateful that I did music first and then writing later, because in music, you drill your technique and you refine it, just like with poetry. And I'm always been a believer that spell casting as writers starts at the letter level. So if I get certain letters obsessing over them, and how then will they funnel or be threaded through a poem? For example, in Agoreograph's Bob, thank God the harp world and the classical music world had Alice Chalafou, because if you think about it, number one, the X is silent. Thank you, France. If I don't ever get to France, at least I am, thank you. I don't even know the national anthem, but thank you for that silent X. But if you think about it, shall, so there's that active permission then, but then you have the L and shall, and then the Chalafou, and then the L and Alice, and the and Alice and the shall. So you have those two little competing sounds going against each other. So it's always been a matter of what can we do with competing letter sounds? What can we do with similar sounds? I don't have synesthesia, but I've been trying to train myself in how, if I were to have synesthesia, what a poem might look like, and actually write monthly craft articles over at 1 Week Critique, where part of that project is to take the poem that I'm speaking about and color coding all of the vowels so that I'm able to see, in theory, okay, these long A's in a poem, they're yellow. These short U's, they're turquoise. And then how, if you break a poem up by its sounds, those little molecules, what is the whole, when you put it back together, looking like? And it's another exercise that I do when I'm completely stuck for writing is I'll just take my name, Jonriccio. As we know, I don't go by Jonathan for various reasons, but there was a poem about that. But what I do then is I take each letter and I make a word bank. So if John, I've got Jalusi, jumping jack, jack in the pulpit, jar, juggle, juggalo. And then if for O is Ovaltine and oftentimes and Oppenheimer and Oprah and Orpheus. And then I just put my words together in ways you would never think of imagining. You know, for example, Oprah's Ovaltine Orpheus with a jumping jack. I mean, so that, you know, granted, there's not, I don't think there's a call for Oprah poems about Ovaltine, but or if there is, let's write a group, let's write an Exquisite Corpse and send it to her. Maybe we'll get on the network. But it's just a way that we can start to imagine these sonic possibilities of throwing together words that would never have any purpose for hanging out other than they came from my name. They're in the word bank. And if they get used for a poem, great. If they don't, then maybe they lead to something else. Okay, Oprah, Orpheus. Oprah's, she's made her own mythology. Orpheus had that little lyre and he is his own myth, and you know, or don't look back. Oprah's always looking forward. So maybe there is a tension to be, maybe if you put Oprah and Orpheus in a poem together, you'll get some tensions that you never thought would exist. And it's, again, it's just because I was named Jonathan, and that O is part of my word bank process.
Excellent, thank you. Lots of answers on the O. Other questions from the audience?
I'll follow up from that because I have a question that I think builds on that. So John, I noticed, for instance, in your one poem, the wonderful list of verbs, alphabetical exploration of verbs. And certainly that seems to connect to what you're talking about in terms of working from the sounds, from the letters, and letting the words lead the poem. But I also noticed that Bob, you had some poems that also made use of listing, and I'm intuiting that in both cases there may be some linkage, whether it's causal or direct or not, between that practice and the question, Bob, that you began with, which is why do we do this, right?
Yeah,
Why do we? And I'm interested to hear each of you talk about the role of list and possibly that question or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing I'm thinking about is there's a poem in the new collection, The Heavy of Human Clouds, which I've worked on with Andrea for quite a while, and I'm happy with it, but it's a poem that includes lists, and I know that it's going to take me years to fully understand the meaning in that list, although I wrote the friggin' list. So the poem ends with a line, "I have spotless agates in my barn." And that came to me as you have to put that is the end of this poem. It takes us through this exploration of a relationship with my mother. But I have had nights where I wake up saying, what the fuck are those agates in the barn? What are they? But I let them be because I have to this is going to sound a little grand, but at a soul level, I have to trust that there's something for me to unpack, and I don't have to rewrite it because I want to define everything. And what I enjoy with that, the use of lists, is that so actually the poem I'm referencing is appearing next week in the Mom Egg Review, and I'm very proud of that publication. And what that tells me is that list of things that I don't fully understand in my heart somehow resonated with a reader. It resonated with an editor, and it resonated, and it will. I have to trust that it will resonate with other people, and that's been quite a remarkable journey of this process of trusting that even if on some level as a poet you don't fully understand what you've put on the page, that it's okay to let it sit there, because you might come back to it in a decade and say, oh, that's what that was. And I think that that's quite an extraordinary gift that we have to offer ourselves.
When I think of list makers who are some of my role models, I look at Joelle McSweeney, who oftentimes her lists are very dense and the diction is just through the roof. But there's also a poet based in Rhode Island, Charles Kell, who sometimes towards the end of his poems, he will bring in maybe 3 higher dictioned words. Sometimes they're chemical-based, chemistry-based, and so he'll have that surrealist ending that just kind of trails you off in mystery. And what I love about surrealism is that you can just go one word after another. You can pile it up like a Jenga tower, and then just of course, the letters will be the girding, so it's not going to collapse on you. But in that particular instance of the Vermont test, that list of verbs, I think that was a later written poem. It started around Christmas of 2020. And at that point, you know, what had I not written about OCD because of all the corners that had painted me in, the shame I felt about it, when there would be little rays of hope and then some crushing defeats. So I just thought, why don't I just take all of these verbs and use it as a way just to fight back against this unwelcome guest? And part of it was, let's get some sound play in this, so lulled and lulled. Let's get some history in there. So Oberlin, I don't know if that's the first time it's ever been used as a verb. Let's get campy with it. You can Sally your mental illness. You can also Sally Jesse Raphael, just to go back to the days of the Miss Cleo in the 90s. So you've got the pathos and you've got the humor, you've got the clowning, you've got I'll say just the revenge against a mental illness. I mean, I speak only for myself, but it is nice to have these revenge fantasies against a mental illness that has governed a great many years of your life. So it's just a way to fight back. And lists are also, especially when you're teaching poetry to younger writers, there's a collection, Sleeping with the Dictionary by Harriet Mullen, and she's got a poem called Any Lit. And if you think about it, it's a pattern with long U sounds and repeated my sounds. So I think it's you are a mai tai, my ukulele, something like that, where it is this list of proper nouns, high diction. It's amazing. If you get a chance, it's on the Poetry Foundation's website, but it has the pattern, but it just varies it, kind of like classical music. For example, if you're doing a chaconne, it's a classical dance every 8 bars. You know, you have to change it up a bit. Bach's chaconne for solo violin is the best example I can think of, where you've got the theme that starts us off with these big dramatic chords, and then you've got to do something for the next 15 minutes, every 8 measures. So you go variation, variation, you're in D minor, then you're in D major, and then you have some bariolage, which is a lot of fancy string crossing. Then you get to more sustained cantabile parts. But at the end of the day, Bach's mission was every 8 measures, the chord progression, the bass line, and that's his incentive. So he made this list of what you can do with music. You can go into a major key, into a minor key, you can arpeggiate, you can play chords, you can vibrate it, you can phrase it in ways, you can do a harmonic instead of the actual note. So I take some of that classical music background, and I guess I've always loved Bach's chaconne. When you play it on the viola, though, it goes into G major. Since we take it down a fifth, it's not the same resonance as D minor. So if nothing more, listen to Bach's chaconne tonight. It's 15 minutes, and your world will be changed for the best if you've never heard it.
Excellent. Do we have maybe a final question? No pressure.
Deborah? I think
I have not so much a question as perhaps a subject to follow on what you've already been discussing, and that having to do with diction. And it is this. Sometimes I enjoy writing and reading a poem in which the diction varies to the extent that it almost sounds like different voices of the same person, different moods, different tones. And, this comes up in the course of making a manuscript, does the diction change from one to the next, but it also comes up for me within a single poem. And I'm wondering what people think about, to what extent is such freedom and such a device confusing, and to what extent is yet another useful tool for us.
Diction for me is, I guess, the fiction equivalent of world building. It allows me, through surrealism, to take the unimaginable, and now it is something that exists. If it's only, even if it's just on my screen or in the air when I speak it out loud, but now you have two words together that are joined in ways that haven't been before. Or even, again, back to that spell casting at the letter level, if you've got two Z's and you want to see them next to two Z's without having to go buy a greatest hits of ZZ Top, you can get a word like quizzical mezzanine. You have 1, 2, 3 quizzical, and then 1, 2, 3 mezzanine, and you've fulfilled your own inner. You want to play in poetry as much as I'm not having sometimes the ticker tape parade of, oh, I've just drafted today, my life is better. It's often, this is not, let's just get this done just so I have it and I can send it off to a few early readers, and I've had the opportunity now to live with it, and I'll come back to it. Just as Bob said, you put it on the back burner. Sometimes you put it on the stove in the guest neighbor's house, in the station wagon down the street. But you've done things with letters. You've elevated just the act of speaking. You've given yourself an opportunity to look at two words differently, and you've given an editor or your reading friends or the people who come hear you listen, come listen to you. Language is a gift. And I'm also, as someone who also teaches students in China where English is not their first language, one of the first things that it taught me was, number one, I need to change up my game of always going to idioms, because with American students, you'd be surprised at how often an idiom can convey your, not that one should build a teaching philosophy of idioms, but for example, if you're teaching Fahrenheit 451 and towards the end, it's the community of readers that are getting with the community of readers. And you say, oh, birds of a feather, because they've got that phoenix. There's a lot of bird images in that Bradbury novel, but you can't exactly expect that idiom to carry over to students who are looking at you thinking, okay, so he's talking about birds, and is there some kind of American bird breed that's got like, is there a parrot that's mated with a cockatoo and like a peak cockatoo or something? But what I love though about doing the real-time aspect is I go into that Google Translator and see if certain words carry over. So we're doing flood myths this week, and one of the words they've gotten the beautiful metaphor of these floods in Greek mythology and in the Bible and in Gilgamesh. There's this baptism, this holy washing. So I said, well, in English, there's this word that I had to learn for the GRE, but might as well get my 10 cents out of it now, ablution, which is that biblical holy washing, that rinsing. And you go into the English to Chinese translator and see if there's a carryover. And sometimes there is. And that's when the teaching magic happens, when you can share a word that is so beautiful to you, that lives in your ear, it coils around your little eardrum, and it puts like a little pearl in there, and you're thinking, how can I use this in a poem someday? Because it is a blue, you've got the shun and the 3 syllables. And now you've then given it as a gift to your students who, and the joy is then watching them, how are they going to put that word into their little Jenga paper, their Jenga construction of words that makes the sentence, that makes the paragraph, that makes the paper.
And my response would be, what I've been thinking about in terms of the question and voices, and even voices varying inside of a poem. I'm actually really glad that I read Letter to Maplethorpe, because in the early stages of that manuscript, that was the only Maplethorpe poem that existed. And Andrea pushed me and said, I want 2 more, and I want them to set up the sections of the book. And there needs to be a letter from Maplethorpe and another letter to Maplethorpe. And it almost killed me, but it was worth it. It really, because what was forced in that exercise was, I never met Robert Mapplethorpe. I was not directly in dialogue with Robert Mapplethorpe, but I came to understand who I was talking to in those poems and who was talking to me in those poems. And in the context of unpacking the experience of the HIV pandemic, what I realized was that the other voice in those poems was the parts of me that I most despised about my behavior through the pandemic. the things that I was most frightened of in terms of what my choices were, both personally and sexually, and in surviving that. And so that voice was something I did not want to touch, but there it was. And I had to let it happen in order to in order to finish that book. I did, and I don't regret it, but it by allowing that part of myself to emerge through a series of poems was quite an extraordinary experience.
Wow, thank you so much for those answers.
Yes, thank you all for attending. Thank you, John and Robert, for giving an amazing reading. Thanks for the great questions. I did put where you can purchase John and Robert's books in the chat, should you wish to do so. And this concludes our second salon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you,
Thank
Andrea.
you.
Thank you.
Everybody, for
Really
coming.
wonderful to see everyone here.
Great to meet you all.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you both. Thank you all.
Good night.